Dr. Ji-woo Kim stared at the small crystal in her hand. It was no bigger than her thumb, but it glowed with a soft blue light. She found it in an old medical storage unit on Earth, packed away with other items from the 19th century. The crystal seemed out of place among the old bandages and glass bottles. The medical research ship HS Healing Light moved quietly through space. Dr. Ji-woo sat in her small office, surrounded by screens showing different types of medical data. She had been studying old medical practices for 5 years now, trying to find forgotten knowledge that might help modern doctors. Dr. Kim, may I come in? Dr. Ha-won Park, the chief medical officer, stood at her door. She was tall and had a kind face that made patients feel safe. Of course, Dr. Park. I found something very interesting. Ji-woo held up the crystal. It was in a box marked Florence Nightingale's personal effects. Dr. Park's eyes grew wide. She knew about Florence Nightingale. Everyone in medical school learned about the famous nurse who changed healthcare forever. Is that what I think it is? She asked, moving closer to look at the crystal. Yes, Ji-woo said with excitement in her voice. It's a consciousness preservation crystal. They were very rare in the 19th century. Only a few were ever made. She turned the crystal in her hand, watching the light move inside it. Someone must have helped Florence Nightingale save her memories and knowledge before she died. The two doctors looked at each other. If they could access the information in the crystal, they might learn things about medical care that had been lost to time. Florence Nightingale was known for her special way of caring for patients and her deep understanding of what made people healthy. We should tell Captain Ta-won right away, Dr. Park said. She pressed a button on her wrist computer. Captain, we need you in Dr. Kim's office. We found something important. Captain Ta-won arrived quickly. He was a serious man who always thought carefully before making decisions. Ji-woo showed him the crystal and explained what it was. Can we read the data? He asked, looking closely at the glowing crystal. We need Soo-bin Lee's help, Ji-woo said. She's the best technologist on the ship. She might know how to access the old crystal technology. They called Soo-bin to the office. She was young, but very smart with old technology. When she saw the crystal, her eyes lit up with interest. I've read about these, she said. They're very complex, but I think I can build a machine to read it. How long will it take? Captain Ta-won asked. Maybe 3 days, Soo-bin answered. I'll need to be very careful. The data inside is probably fragile after all these years. Captain Ta-won nodded. Make this your top priority, he said. If we can access Florence Nightingale's knowledge, it could help many people. Over the next 3 days, Soo-bin worked hard in her lab. She built a special holder for the crystal and connected it to the ship's computers. Ji-woo helped her understand what kind of medical information they might find, so she could set up the right kind of data readers. On the 3rd day, they were ready to try reading the crystal. Captain Ta-won, Dr. Park, and Ji-woo gathered in Soo-bin's lab. The crystal sat in its special holder, glowing brighter than before. Ready? Soo-bin asked, looking at everyone in the room. They all nodded. She pressed a button, and the crystal's light filled the room. Numbers and letters appeared on the screens around them. Then, something unexpected happened. A voice came from the ship's speakers, a woman's voice with an old English accent. Hello, the voice said clearly. I am Florence Nightingale. Who has awakened me? Everyone in the room stood still, amazed by what they heard. They weren't just looking at old medical records. They had found Florence Nightingale's actual consciousness, preserved for hundreds of years, waiting to share her knowledge with the future. Dr. Ji-woo Kim knew that this moment would change everything. They had just made the biggest medical discovery in the last 100 years, and their real work was just beginning. The room fell silent after Florence Nightingale's voice filled the air. Soo-bin Lee's hands moved quickly over her control panel, making sure all systems were working correctly. Dr. Ji-woo Kim stepped forward, her heart beating fast with excitement. Ms. Nightingale, Ji-woo said clearly, I am Dr. Ji-woo Kim. We are on a medical research ship in the year 2457. There was a pause before Florence's voice came again. 2457. That is quite remarkable. And you are doctors. Her voice was calm and interested, showing no fear at finding herself in the future. Dr. Hadwan Park moved closer to the crystal's display. Yes, we are. I am Dr. Park, the chief medical officer of this ship. We found your consciousness crystal in an old storage unit on Earth. Ah, yes, the crystal, Florence said. It was an experimental technology in my time. A dear friend who was a scientist helped me preserve my knowledge. We hoped it might help future generations. Captain Tahuan watched as Su Bin's screen showed more and more data flowing from the crystal. Ms. Nightingale, how much do you remember? He asked. Everything, she replied. My memories, my medical knowledge, my experiences in the Crimean War, and all my research on patient care and hospital management. It's all here. Su Bin raised her hand to get everyone's attention. The crystal's data is stable, but we should create a better way to communicate. I can build a holographic interface. It will let us see Ms. Nightingale and make talking easier. Please call me Florence, the voice said warmly. And yes, I would like to see who I'm talking to as well. Over the next few hours, Su Bin worked with the ship's systems to create a holographic form for Florence. Dr. Kim stayed in the lab, asking Florence about her memories and medical practices. Every answer showed that Florence's mind was sharp and clear. Finally, Su Bin announced she was ready. She pressed several buttons, and a beam of light rose from next to the crystal. It took the shape of a woman in a long dress, holding a lamp. Florence Nightingale, as she looked in her prime. Florence looked at her holographic hands with interest. How wonderful, she said, turning to look at everyone in the room. Now shall we discuss how I can help with modern medicine? Dr. Park stepped forward. Medicine has changed a lot since your time, Florence. We have machines that can heal injuries in minutes and medicines that can cure most diseases. Yet you still have problems to solve, or you wouldn't be so interested in my knowledge, Florence said wisely. She walked around the room, her holographic form moving smoothly. Tell me about your challenges. Jai Wu explained about new diseases that were appearing on colony worlds and how some old illnesses were becoming resistant to modern treatments. She told Florence about the challenges of keeping people healthy on long space journeys. Florence listened carefully, her holographic face showing deep thought. The basic principles of health and healing never change, she said. Clean air, good food, proper rest, and careful attention to the patient's needs. These things are always important. Captain Taiwan saw the value in her words. Dr. Park, I want you to work with Florence. See how her knowledge can help our medical team. Of course, Dr. Park said. Florence, would you like to see our medical bay? As they walked through the ship's corridors, Florence's hologram attracted curious looks from the crew. She asked questions about everything she saw, learning quickly about modern technology and medical practices. In the medical bay, Florence stopped by each patient's bed, reading their medical charts on the floating screens. She asked careful questions about their care and made suggestions that surprised the doctors with their insight. You see, Florence said, standing in the middle of the medical bay, the technology may be different, but caring for patients remains an art as much as a science. We must treat the whole person, not just their illness. Dr. Kim watched as Florence began teaching them things that modern medicine had forgotten. This was more than just a historical discovery. It was a bridge between past and future that would change medicine forever. Dr. Yan Ji Cho, the ship's psychological specialist, observed Florence Nightingale's holographic form with professional interest. She had been called to help Florence adjust to the significant changes between her time and the present day. The historical nurse stood by a medical bed, examining the automated systems with a mixture of wonder and concern. These machines do much of the work we nurses used to do, Florence said, watching as a medical robot checked a patient's vital signs. I worry that they might make doctors and nurses forget the importance of human touch and healing. That's exactly why we need your help, Dr. Cho said gently. Many of our younger medical staff have never worked without these machines. They know how to treat illnesses, but sometimes forget how to treat people. Captain Ta Huan entered the medical bay with several senior staff members. They wanted to learn from Florence's experience with managing large numbers of patients. The healing light was heading to a new space colony that needed medical help. In my time, Florence explained, we had to care for hundreds of wounded soldiers with very few supplies. The most important thing was to keep everything clean and organized. She walked through the medical bay, her holographic lamp glowing softly. I see you have wonderful machines for cleaning now, but the principle remains the same. Dr. He Jin Ri, a young doctor fresh from medical school, raised his hand. But why focus on basic things like cleanliness when we have medicines that can kill all known germs? He asked. Florence turned to him with a patient smile. Young man, the simplest solutions are often the most important. Your medicines are wonderful, but preventing illness is always better than curing it. Tell me, what happens when your medicines don't work? The room fell quiet. Everyone knew about the new diseases that were appearing on colony worlds, diseases that didn't respond to their advanced medicines. Dr. Cho watched the interaction carefully. She could see how Florence's old-fashioned ideas were challenging the modern doctor's way of thinking. But she could also see that Florence was learning from them, asking questions about their modern methods and understanding their views. Later that day, Dr. Cho met with Captain Ta Huan in his office. How is she adapting? The captain asked. Remarkably well, Dr. Cho replied. She's intelligent and open-minded. She doesn't reject our modern methods, but she helps us see what we might have forgotten from the past. The captain nodded thoughtfully. And the crew? How are they responding to her? Most are fascinated by her. Some, like Dr. Ri, question her old-fashioned ideas at first. But when they listen to her reasoning, they begin to understand. She has a way of teaching that makes people think deeply about what they do. Their conversation was interrupted by a call from the medical bay. Dr. Park's voice came through the speaker. Captain, you need to see this. Florence has found something important in our patient care routines. When they arrived at the medical bay, they found Florence working with Su Bin to analyze patient recovery data. Her holographic form pointed to patterns on the floating screens. Look here, Florence said. Patients in private rooms recover more slowly than those who share rooms. In my time, we learned that people heal better when they have company. Your private rooms are wonderful, but perhaps too isolating. Dr. Park looked at the data with surprise. She's right. We were so focused on preventing the spread of illness that we forgot about the healing power of human connection. Captain Ta Huan watched as Florence continued to point out other patterns they had missed. She showed them how small changes in room layout, lighting, and daily routines could help patients heal faster. Technology is a tool, Florence said, looking around at the advanced medical equipment. But healing is about understanding how all parts work together. The body, the mind, the environment, and the human spirit. This hasn't changed since my time, and I don't believe it ever will. Dr. Cho smiled as she watched the medical staff taking notes and asking questions. The clash between old and new ways of thinking was turning into something better, a bridge between the wisdom of the past and the knowledge of the present. The HSS Healing Light received an urgent message from the Andromeda colony. Dr. Du Yun Quan, the ship's epidemic specialist, read the message with growing concern. A strange illness was spreading through the colony, and their modern medicines weren't working. Captain, Dr. Quan called through the ship's communication system. We have an emergency. The Andromeda colony reports 300 people are sick with an unknown disease. Captain Ta Huan ordered the ship to change course immediately. In the medical bay, Dr. Park gathered her team to prepare for the emergency. Florence Nightingale's hologram stood with them, listening carefully to the symptoms being reported. Fever, weakness, confusion. Dr. Park read from the report. The colony's doctors can't find the cause. Their medical computers don't recognize the pattern. Florence moved closer to the display screen. These symptoms remind me of something I saw during the Crimean War, she said. Tell me about the colony's living conditions. Dr. Kwan brought up more information. It's a new colony, built just 6 months ago. 2,000 people live there, mostly in connected living units. They have the newest air filtration systems and medical facilities. What about their water system? Florence asked. In my time, we learned that shared water could spread disease faster than anything else. The medical team looked at each other. Modern water systems were supposed to be completely safe, but when they checked the colony's reports, they found something interesting. The water recycling system had been giving strange readings for the past week. The automated systems didn't flag it as dangerous, Dr. Kwan said, because each reading was only slightly off normal. But looking at the pattern, it's exactly like what we saw in the military hospitals, Florence said. Small problems adding up to make people sick. Your computers look for big changes, but sometimes it's the small changes that matter most. The ship arrived at the colony the next day. Dr. Park led her team to the colony's medical center, with Florence's hologram accompanying them. The colonial doctors were surprised to see a historical figure helping with their modern crisis. Florence worked with Dr. Kwan to examine the patients. She asked questions that the modern doctors hadn't thought to ask. What time of day did people feel worst? Which parts of the colony had the most sick people? Did anyone get better on their own? Look at this, Florence said, pointing to a map of the colony. The pattern of illness follows the water pipe system, and the symptoms are worse in the morning, after the pipes have been still all night. Dr. Kwan ran new tests based on Florence's observations. He found tiny organisms growing in the pipes, too small for the regular tests to detect, but enough to make people sick when they built up overnight. The solution is simple, Florence said. In my time, we learned to flush water systems regularly and add small amounts of natural cleansing agents. Your modern systems are very good, but sometimes old solutions work best. The colonial engineers followed Florence's advice. They modified the water system to flush itself every few hours and added traditional cleaning methods to their modern ones. Within days, people began to recover. This is why we need both old and new knowledge, Dr. Park said to her team. Our modern technology is wonderful, but Florence's experience helped us see what we were missing. Florence's hologram stood by a patient's bed, checking their recovery. In my time, we had to watch very carefully for patterns because we didn't have machines to help us. Sometimes that careful watching is still important. Captain Tawan received a message from the colony's leaders, thanking them for their help. The combination of historical wisdom and modern medicine saved our colony, they said. As the healing light prepared to leave the colony, Dr. Kwan worked with Florence to write new guidelines for colony health systems. They combined her historical knowledge with modern technology to create better ways of keeping people healthy. Chief Engineer Hyun-Soo Shin spent many hours in his workshop aboard the HSS Healing Light. After witnessing Florence Nightingale's success in helping the Andromeda colony, he had an idea that could change everything. He wanted to connect Florence's consciousness directly to the ship's medical systems. The interface needs to be perfect, Hyun-Soo explained to Captain Tawan during their morning meeting. Florence should be able to access all our medical data while sharing her knowledge with our systems. The captain considered this carefully. Have you discussed this with Florence? He asked. I have, Hyun-Soo replied. She understands that this integration could help more people than she could ever reach in her original lifetime. Florence's hologram appeared in the meeting room. Engineer Shin has explained everything to me, she said. In my time, I always wanted to spread medical knowledge as widely as possible. This seems like a wonderful way to do that. Dr. Park joined them, bringing medical data from their recent success at the colony. If we can combine Florence's observational methods with our modern diagnostic systems, we could prevent many problems before they become serious. Hyun-Soo worked with Soo Bin to create the new interface. They built special connections between Florence's crystal and the ship's medical computers. The work was difficult, as they had to make sure the old technology of the crystal could work with their modern systems. The crystal's data patterns are complex, Su Bin said, showing Florence the diagrams on her screen. They're like a beautiful old tapestry that we need to weave into our modern digital fabric. Florence watched with interest as they worked. In my time, we wrote everything in notebooks, she said. Now my knowledge will live in your machines. It's rather exciting. After 2 weeks of careful work, they were ready to test the system. The medical bay was quiet except for the soft hum of machines. Florence's hologram stood in the center of the room as Hyun-soo started the integration process. "Are you ready, Florence?" he asked. "Yes," she replied calmly. "Let us begin." The room's lights dimmed slightly as the integration started. Florence's hologram began to glow brighter. On the screens around them, medical data flowed quickly as her knowledge merged with the ship's systems. Suddenly, all the medical displays in the room lit up with new information. Old medical wisdom mixed with modern data, creating new ways of understanding health and healing. The ship's computers began to show health patterns they had never noticed before. "It's working," Dr. Park said, looking at the displays. "The computers are learning from Florence's experience, and she can now access all our medical knowledge." Florence moved around the room, her hologram now able to interact directly with all the ship's systems. "This is remarkable," she said. "I can see everything. Patient histories, treatment patterns, research data. And I can share what I know about patient care in ways I never could before." Captain Ta-hwan watched as Florence demonstrated her new abilities. She could now analyze patient data instantly, combining her historical knowledge with modern medical science. When she looked at a patient, she could see both their current medical readings and patterns that reminded her of cases from her past. "This is more than just connecting old and new," Hyun-soo explained. "We've created a new kind of medical knowledge that uses both human wisdom and computer intelligence." The success of the integration brought new hope to the medical team. They now had a system that could think both like an experienced nurse from the past and a modern medical computer. It was the perfect combination of human care and advanced technology. As evening came, Florence's hologram stood by the window, looking out at the stars. "In my time, I carried a lamp to check on patients in the dark," she said. "Now I can help people across the galaxy. What a wonderful future this is." Junior Medical Officer Min Ji-song noticed something strange during her morning check of the ship's systems. The crystal containing Florence Nightingale's consciousness was giving off a different color than usual. Instead of its normal bright blue glow, it had a slight purple tinge. Min Ji called data specialist Jae-hee Park to look at the crystal. Jae-hee ran several tests and grew more worried with each result. The crystal was slowly breaking down. If they didn't find a solution, they would lose Florence's consciousness forever. "How long do we have?" Min Ji asked, her voice filled with concern. "Maybe 2 weeks," Jae-hee replied. "The crystal's structure is becoming unstable. It wasn't meant to last this long or handle so much information." They brought their findings to Captain Ta-hwan and Dr. Park. Florence's hologram joined them, calm despite hearing about her possible end. "We must save the data," Captain Ta-hwan said. "Florence's knowledge is too valuable to lose." "The problem is more complex than just saving data," Jae-hee explained. "The crystal doesn't just hold information. It holds Florence's actual consciousness, her thoughts, her personality, her ability to learn and adapt. We need to find a way to transfer all of that." Florence spoke up. "In my time, we learned that sometimes the best solution is to face a problem honestly and work together to solve it. Tell me what I can do to help." Dr. Park called an emergency meeting of the ship's best minds. Engineers, doctors, and computer specialists gathered to find a solution. They worked around the clock, trying different ways to preserve Florence's consciousness. "The integration system we built might be the key," Hyun-soo Shin suggested. "We already connected Florence to the ship's computers. Maybe we can use that connection to move her consciousness somewhere else. Su Bin Lee, who had helped awaken Florence, agreed. But we need something special to hold her consciousness. Regular computer systems aren't enough. They decided to build a new kind of digital space just for Florence. It would be like a garden of knowledge, where her consciousness could live and grow. The ship's engineers and computer experts worked together, using parts of the ship's systems in new ways. As they worked, Florence continued helping patients. She knew she might disappear soon, but she stayed focused on caring for others. She spent extra time teaching the medical staff, sharing as much knowledge as she could. Even if we can't save me, she told Minji, my ideas about patient care will live on through all of you. But Minji refused to give up. She remembered something from her medical history classes about how the brain stores memories. Working with Jai, she developed a new way to map Florence's consciousness. Look, Minji showed the others. Florence's consciousness is like a pattern of light. If we can copy that pattern exactly, we can save her. The crystal's purple color grew darker each day. The team worked faster, fighting against time. They built their new system using parts from all over the ship. Every department helped, knowing how important Florence's knowledge was. On the day the crystal turned deep purple, they were finally ready to try moving Florence's consciousness. The medical bay was crowded with people watching and hoping. Florence's hologram stood in the center, her lamp glowing softly. Are you ready, Florence? Jae asked. Yes, Florence replied. Whatever happens, I want you all to know how grateful I am for this second chance to help people. The transfer began. Lights flickered across the ship as power flowed into their new system. The crystal glowed brightly one last time, then went dark. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see if their plan had worked. For several long minutes after the crystal went dark, nothing happened in the medical bay of the HSS Healing Light. The screens remained blank, and Florence's hologram was gone. AI specialist Yun-Ho Choi typed quickly at his control panel, searching for any sign of Florence's consciousness in the ship's new systems. There's something, Yun-Ho said suddenly, pointing to a pattern of light moving across his screen. The transfer worked, but her consciousness needs time to adjust to its new home. Dr. Park moved closer to look at the screen. Can you help her, Yun-Ho? She asked. I think so, he replied. We need to guide her consciousness through the new digital space we built. It's like helping someone wake up in a new room. Yun-Ho worked with the ship's AI systems to create a familiar environment for Florence. He made the digital space feel like a Victorian hospital ward, but with modern medical equipment added. This would help Florence's consciousness feel comfortable while adapting to the new technology. Slowly, patterns of light began to form in the center of the medical bay. The hologram system came back to life, and Florence's image appeared. She looked the same as before, but somehow clearer and more solid. Florence, Captain Tawan called out. Are you with us? Florence's hologram opened her eyes. Yes, I am here, she said, looking around at everyone. Everything feels different, clearer somehow. Yun-Ho explained that her consciousness was now part of a new kind of system. It combined the best parts of human thinking with advanced computer technology. Florence could now process medical information even faster than before, while keeping all her human wisdom and experience. Try looking at the patient data, he suggested. Florence turned to the nearest medical screen. Her eyes widened with surprise. This is remarkable, she said. I can see patterns in the medical data that I never could before. It's like having the experience of 100 years of nursing, all at once. The medical team watched as Florence demonstrated her new abilities. She could now analyze complex medical problems in seconds, combining her historical knowledge with the speed of modern computers. But she still kept her gentle way of talking to patients and her deep understanding of human care. We've created something entirely new, Yun-Ho said proudly. A system that thinks like both a human and a computer. Florence worked with Yun-Ho over the next few days to develop her new capabilities. They found ways to use her 19th-century nursing knowledge to make the ship's medical AI systems work better. The combination of Florence's experience and modern technology created new ways of treating patients that no one had thought of before. In my time, Florence explained to the medical staff, we had to rely on careful observation and human understanding. Now we can combine that with your wonderful technology to provide even better care. The success of this new system spread quickly through the space fleet. Other medical ships wanted to learn about the combination of historical wisdom and modern science. Captain Tawan received messages from hospitals across the galaxy, all asking how they could use this new approach to medical care. What you've created here is revolutionary, Dr. Park told Florence and Yano. You've found a way to preserve the best of the past while embracing the future. Florence stood by a patient's bed, her hologram glowing softly. She could now access all of the ship's medical knowledge instantly, but she still took time to talk with each patient, just as she had done in her original lifetime. The most important thing in medicine, she said, will always be the connection between healer and patient. Technology can help us make that connection stronger, but it can never replace it. As the day ended, Florence looked out at the stars through the medical bay window. Her consciousness was now safe, ready to continue helping people far into the future. It was more than she could have ever imagined when she first became a nurse so many years ago. 1 year had passed since Florence Nightingale's consciousness was successfully saved and integrated into the HSS Healing Light systems. Medical Director Jin-Woo Lee stood in his office, preparing a report about the remarkable changes that had occurred during this time. The ship had become famous throughout the galaxy as a center of medical excellence. Doctors and nurses from many worlds came to learn about the new way of healing that combined Florence's historical wisdom with modern technology. Jin-Woo remembered how it all started with a small crystal found in an old storage room. Florence, Jin-Woo called out, "Would you join me for a moment?" The hologram appeared, still carrying her famous lamp. Even after a year of working with advanced technology, Florence kept this symbol of her original mission to bring light to dark places. "Of course, Director Lee," she said warmly. "Are you finishing the annual report?" "Yes," he replied. "Would you like to hear what we've accomplished this year?" Florence nodded, and Jin-Woo began reading from his screen. The ship had treated over 10,000 patients in the past year. They had solved medical mysteries on 12 different colony worlds. Most importantly, they had trained 500 medical teams in the new combined method of healthcare. "Your influence has spread far beyond this ship," Jin-Woo told Florence. "Every medical center that learns from us becomes better at caring for patients." Dr. Park entered the office, bringing more good news. The space fleet had decided to create more ships like the Healing Light. Each one would carry a copy of the special system they had built for Florence's consciousness. "But will I still be myself if I exist in many places?" Florence asked thoughtfully. Jin-Woo explained that each copy would grow and learn separately, just as human teachers share their knowledge, but remain unique individuals. Florence would be like a great teacher, sharing her wisdom across the galaxy. The medical bay had changed too. Following Florence's advice, they had made the rooms more comfortable and welcoming. Patients could see the stars through large windows, and there were comfortable chairs where they could sit with visitors. The medical robots now moved more quietly and spoke in gentle voices, just as Florence had taught them. "Remember how worried some people were about mixing old and new medical ideas?" Dr. Park asked with a smile. "Now they can't imagine working any other way." Florence's hologram walked to the window, looking out at a nearby planet. "In my first life, I wanted to change how people thought about healthcare," she said. "I never imagined I would get a second chance to help, especially among the stars." Captain Tawan joined them, bringing news from Earth. The original hospital where Florence had worked was now a museum. They had created a special display showing how her ideas had traveled from Earth's past to humanity's future in space. "Your legacy lives in 2 times now," the captain said. "You showed us that good ideas never really get old. They just find new ways to help people." Jinwoo finished his report with a special section about what they had learned. The most important lesson was that healing needed both knowledge and kindness. Modern technology could cure diseases, but Florence's gentle way of caring for patients made people feel better in their hearts too. As evening came to the ship, Florence made her usual rounds in the medical bay. She checked on each patient, talking softly with them, and making sure they were comfortable. The machines around her collected data and monitored vital signs, but Florence watched for the small signs of improvement that only human wisdom could see. "Every life we help is a light in the darkness," Florence said, her lamp glowing gently in the quiet medical bay. "Whether we use simple bandages or advanced medicine, the most important thing is to care for each person with kindness and understanding." The HSS Healing Light continued its journey through space, carrying Florence's wisdom to new worlds. Her story had become more than history. It was now part of humanity's future among the stars.